Hello everyone, my name is Marin Guevara and welcome to my favorite books of 2025. Now, this is one of my favorite videos to film. I do love going over the creme de la creme of my reading experience in the past year. And some of these books you might have already seen in dedicated videos, so I probably won't go too in-depth on them. However, I will explain, why I consider these a favorite, why they stood out, and why I think why these stories are going to remain with me for the years to come. So we got quite a number of books here, and might as well just get started. Now, the first book that I have here is The Lost Estate, or Le Grand Monde by Alain Fournier. Now, I actually dedicated an entire review/discussion video on this book, so I will link that one down below. But for those who don't know, this book takes place in the late 19th century, and we're following a man named Francois who is recounting his adolescence, particularly at a time where he was friends with this young man named Monde. And he's recounting a specific adventure that Monde had, where he escapes class basically and gets lost in the countryside, where he stumbles upon this grand estate holding this extravagant party, where he also meets this beautiful young woman. He eventually finds his way back home, but Monde becomes obsessed with trying to find that estate again. The Lost Estate is a work of French literature, and I think what really helped this book stand out to me was just how different it felt reading it compared to other previous French classics I've read in the past. I mean, like Émile Zola or Alexandre Dumas, Gaston Leroux, where a lot of those stories have moments of high tension drama, while The Lost Estate felt quieter. It felt more tender in its tone and in its voice. And I really enjoy the themes that Fournier is exploring here. I think he does a great job of capturing the beauty, the simple joys of youth, the sort of unbridled potential you had when you were young, that you felt that you had when you were young. But then he contrasts that very well with the bittersweet disappointment that comes along with unfulfilled dreams or hopes when you're an adult. Reading this book felt like sitting down at the feet of this older gentleman, listening to him recount his childhood, but then at the same time, he's telling you a fairy tale, because there is this fairy tale vibe to the book that I really enjoyed. That was right up my alley. I know for some others, like, it can be off-putting, but it worked for me. And I felt that the fairy tale vibe added to the tender, almost cozy feel to it, which contrasted very nicely to the genuinely sad moments that happened in this book. But yeah, The Lost Estate by Alain Fournier, I highly recommend that you check it out. It's not very long at all. I do think that, at least here in the States, it's underrated. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. I hear that it is popular back in France, and I can see why this was an excellent book and very much a gem. Next, we have The Bear Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. Now, I initially attempted this book back in 2017. However, I got halfway through and then DNF'd it because at the time I just wasn't feeling it. I felt that it was too slow, it was meandering. However, in 2025, I got this copy during my trip to Stockholm, and I decided, you know what? It's been a while. I'm a more seasoned reader. Let me have a go at it again. And yeah, it definitely worked out for me this second go around. Now, for those who don't know, this is a work of historical fantasy. This takes place after, Rome has left, King Arthur has died, and now you have the Britons and the Saxons living together. However, there's this strange mist that shrouds the land that causes people to forget. And we're following this elderly Briton couple named Axel and Beatrice, and they remember one day that they have a son and they haven't seen him in years. So they decide to leave their home and go on this journey through this misty land to be reunited with their son. What really made me invested in this book was the relationship between our two main characters of Axel and Beatrice. And I know there are reviewers that disagree with me, who find them as characters and the relationship to be one note or one dimensional. It's just an elderly couple and they're devoted to one another and that's it. However, I find the simplicity of the relationship very beautiful. This idea that you have these two individuals who have survived the decades with one another, the mist has taken away their memories, but it was not able to take away the devotion and love that they have for the other. And I do love the way that memory, the theme of memory, kind of plays into the relationship. So memory is a huge theme in this book, the importance of it, both on the personal scale, but then also on the larger societal one as well. There's this quote in the book where Axel is basically begging Beatrice, saying, should the mist clear and our memories return, and there are memories where I disappoint you, please do not forget, the love that we have for each other right now, because what good is, one memory coming from the mist if it's going to push out another one? And it does start up this very interesting conversation about, how important is memory, particularly horrible memories, memories of suffering and pain. Is it necessarily essential to have? Can we let go? Does it diminish the relationship, or does it, add richness to it? Does it add depth? I really do like the way that Ishiguro explores these themes through this particular setting, a post-Arthurian time that did feel familiar in certain moments. I mean, you hear mention of King Arthur, and there's dragons and beasts. There's even one remaining member of the Round Table. However, there's also this melancholic, mystic vibe to the book that I honestly really enjoyed. There are moments in the narrative where I wasn't sure exactly, like fully what was going on, as if it was shrouded in mystery. It was going to remain shrouded in mystery. And there's also this melancholic feeling as well, because you do get a sense that this whole grand era of King Arthur, you're questioning, was it really all that it was? And if so, it's dead. It's been dead for quite a while, and the era that's succeeding it is going to be one filled with suffering. All in all, this was a beautiful, poignant book, and I'm not going to lie, that ending, I was struggling to hold back the tears. Just very beautiful in such a sad way, and I'm very glad that I gave this book a second chance. For my next favorite book of 2025, we have The Forgotten Beasts of Eld by Patricia A. McKillop. This is my first McKillop, and it certainly won't be my last. I consider this one to be a work of kind of a classic fantasy, similar to like Peter S. Beagle's The Last Unicorn. This one came out in 1974. And here we're following Sybil, who is this sort of sorceress. She's descended from a line of powerful wizards, and she lives by herself in the woods, where she calls upon all of these beasts to her. And one day this soldier shows up at her gates and gives her an infant to raise, and from that day onward, her life is forever changed. The best way I can describe my reading experience is, imagine a beautiful, intricately detailed woven medieval tapestry, just looking at it, soaking in all the detail. That's what it felt like reading The Forgotten Beasts of Eld. That's how lush and rich it was, despite it being fairly short in my opinion. I did enjoy following our main character of Sybil. She's a strong character. She displays a lot of inner strength in particular, and I did like seeing her growth as a character throughout the narrative. When in the beginning of the book, she is handed this infant to look after, she's initially wary. However, it was very touching to see her love this child, come to love him as if he were her own flesh and blood. There's also moments where she's been wronged and she desires retribution, vengeance, and you see her use her powers to enact this. And there's also these moments where she's looking back on the past in a very sort of like longing but also mournful way, longing to be that person that she once was, but then coming to terms with the fact that, she's someone different now and she has to look towards the future. This book explores a lot of themes like motherhood, agency, nostalgia, and I think McKillop does a great job of weaving them all together into this beautiful fantasy tale. If you want to get into older fantasy, if you want to get into more standalones, I would definitely recommend that you pick up McKillop's The Forgotten Beasts of Eld. For this book, since I already had Men at Arms as my number one in my City Watch ranking video, I decided that Night Watch will be the representative for the series in this one. So 2025 was the year of the City Watch. I did not see that coming, but I read Guards and ended up binging the rest of the 7 books, and now it's one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. And yeah, I'm very glad to have started on this journey, and I can't wait to reread it in the future. I just loved following these characters and following their shenanigans, and Night Watch was just an excellent book. This is regarded by many as their favorite City Watch book, but then I've also heard other people say that it's the best book in the Discworld as a whole. And I can definitely see why, and I can see why this got a Penguin Modern Classic edition as well. In the 6th installment of the series, you have Sam Vimes chasing down this murderer, and he's suddenly thrust back into the past on this day of this disastrous street rebellion. And now he's been tasked with not only getting this killer, but then also ensuring that the events of this rebellion go as they ought to, as they as they occurred. And this kind of throws a wrench into it because this kind of conflicts with Vimes' own sense of morality and justice. And, I love this book for, the fun time travel element, but then also we get down to the nitty gritty of who Sam Vimes is as a man, as a character. And Pratchett explores the story with, yes, his customary humor, but then he really does a good job of exploring themes of justice and what that truly entails. And yeah, this is just an excellent book. It's the 6th book in the series, and if you haven't tried the City Watch, I highly recommend that you do so. Moving on to the next book, we have The Hexologist, A Tangle of Time by Josiah Bancroft. This is book 2 in the Hexologist series, and oh my god, this book is just highly underrated. More people ought to read it. If you are a fan of fantasy mysteries and you haven't picked up the Hexologist series, you're missing out. You truly are missing out. Josiah Bancroft is just... he's one of my favorite authors of all time, and I don't typically pay attention to blurbs on the book, on the cover of books, but I do agree with the ones that we have here. Josiah Bancroft is a magician. Indeed, he is, and he is a gift to the genre. His authorial voice is just fantastic, and honestly, a breath of fresh air within, modern fantasy. And more people ought to read him and ought to read his books. So The Hexologist is, as I mentioned, the 2nd book in this fantasy mystery series where we're following a married couple, Iz and Warren Wilby. They're living in this, alternate jazz age fantasy world where they solve cases using hexology, this branch of magic. And in this one, as you can tell from the title, also deals with time shenanigans. The book starts off with the suspicious death of an artist. However, as Iz and Warren are investigating it, the crime scene starts to shift underneath their feet. And it turns out there's someone in the shadows who is using magic to manipulate reality and time, trying to cover his tracks. And so this proves to be a very difficult case for Iz and Warren. One that, through Iz's hexes and Warren's muscles and their bag of relics, they hope to solve. Now, if you're a fantasy mystery reader, but then you also want some strong characterization, I highly recommend this series. I think one of the greatest strengths of these books is in the characters. I think Bancroft does a phenomenal job of getting the reader to know the characters as individuals, but then also seeing them in a relationship. We see how Iz and Warren are very different from one another in terms of personality. Iz is very prickly, doesn't like really interacting with many people. And then you have Warren, who is basically a himbo. And you see how their differences complement one another. This is a series that has, one, older protagonists. I know that, throughout book 2, as I'm perusing through a lot of videos, there are readers who express a desire to see more older protagonists in their fantasy works. And The Hexologist has this. You're following a couple that is well into their 30s. And not only that, they have a healthy, loving, stable relationship. And that's another thing that I see other fantasy readers want more of in their books. So this one has it. I would also recommend The Hexologist to those who are into cozy fantasy. Now, hear me out. Bancroft isn't afraid to kind of slow the pace of the mystery and just have the reader be immersed in the domestic life of the Wilbys, because it's in those moments where we really get to know them as characters and where a lot of the cozy feeling, the cozy vibe comes from. And the thing is, especially in the 2nd book, I was amazed how Bancroft was able to balance that cozy feel with the high stakes, because there are some high stakes in this book. So this was just great read, a fantastic sequel, one that I loved over the 1st book. And I'm excited. I'm thrilled to see what happens in the 3rd one. So yeah, if you haven't read The Hexologist, you really ought to. You really should. And by the way, Subterranean Press, please come out with your edition of the 2nd book. Please, 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 please. That's all. Now, the next title is another 2nd book in a fantasy mystery series, and that is A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the 2nd book in the Shadow of the Leviathan / An Ended mystery series. I'm not entirely sure which one is the correct title, but yeah, this, along with A Tangle of Time, was one of my most anticipated reads of 2025, and it did not disappoint. I voraciously read this, and when I got to the end, my immediate reaction was, okay, when's the 3rd book? I need that 3rd book in my hands right now. So this is very interesting. It's a genre blender of a series where it is fantasy, but then it's also a bit of sci-fi because there is the use of this very interesting technology. So in this world, you have an empire that makes use of these giant seawalls that are meant to fend off these leviathans that rise up out of the ocean and threaten to encroach upon the land and destroy everything in its path. Each book is a mystery, and we're following our two main characters, Anna and Din, who are sort of our pseudo Sherlock and our pseudo Watson. And in this book, they're investigating the disappearance of this treasury officer. He left this room that is almost impossible to leave. However, eventually they're not only investigating his disappearance, but also his murder. So what I love about this series so far is just that the mystery itself is very fast-paced, incredibly well-paced. And I love that with every new clue that we get, we learn more about the world in such an organic way. I'm just, these books in the series, they're just thrill rides for me. I really enjoy them. They're very addictive. And yeah, Bennett does a great job of not only crafting the mystery, but making this world so interesting and appealing. I really want to learn more of the secrets that are hidden from us. And I really hope that this isn't just a trilogy and that there are more books in the series. I'm very much looking forward to that third one. Next, we have Observatory Mansions by Edward Carey. This is my first book I've read from Edward Carey, and I definitely want to read more from him. I was drawn to this one in particular because people have likened it to Gormenghast, and that's primarily due to the cast of eccentric characters that you meet. So this one, we're following a group of these tenants that live in this apartment building called Observatory Mansions. And yes, they're initially presented to you as, eccentric and quirky, but you come to realize that a lot of their eccentricities, their quirks, are sort of like residuals from past trauma. And this is very much a book about the desire for human connection, but then it's clashing with these tenants and the way that they kind of build up walls and kind of resist initially that connection. This is definitely the most distinct book that I've read this year. Just in terms of the feelings it evoked out of me. Like, there were moments where I found it to be amusing, especially with how quirky these characters are, but then there were moments where I kind of felt weirded out, and then they were quickly followed by moments where I felt very sad. Like, there are sad moments in this book. It's such a gem. It's such a odd gem of a book, and if you want more of my thoughts on it, I would definitely recommend that you check out that video that I did on it. I'll link it down below. Next, we have La Bête Humaine by Émile Zola. Zola, for me, is just hit after hit after hit. I've enjoyed every book that I've read from him so far, and La Bête Humaine is no exception. I mean, this one has a lot. It has a lot of high-octane drama in it. It's got a lot of violence. Here we have a murder plot. We got a man wrestling with his homicidal tendencies. We have a condemnation of the corruption within the French judicial system. We have trains. If any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely check it out. I will say, though, that if you love horses, maybe avoid this because there is a gnarly scene with a horse in there. But anyway, I was just enthralled the entire time I was reading this book. From beginning to end, I was very much invested in knowing the fates of these characters. Even though I can't say I liked any of them, I was very much intrigued. They're very flawed. Another thing that I really enjoyed was sort of like the imagery he used here. In previous books, I've noticed he does this quite a bit. For instance, in The Lady's Paradise, in that book, we're following the emergence of a modern-day department store. And the name of that store is called The Lady's Paradise. And Zola likens this store as a temple of worship to not only women who are like the main consumers, but it's a temple to consumerism and greed. In Germinal, you have the image of the mine shaft. So you have miners descending down the mine day in, day out, doing back-breaking labor for very little money. And so he likens the mine shaft as the jaws of this beast, eating all these people every single day and never being satiated. And then in La Bête Humaine, you have the image of the train, which encapsulates, man's progress, his ingenuity, moving goods and people across longer distances for a short amount of time. But then also man's growing moral indifference. These people on the train don't realize that they are passing by other human beings who are suffering. But it doesn't really matter. You just see them in the blink of an eye and don't really think about them. They don't register. So this is such a rich book and a thrilling one at that. And if you want to read a Zola, I definitely recommend that you check out La Bête Humaine. Now I'm going to show you the last two books together because they are connected, and that is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell and The Ladies of Grace Adieu, both by Susanna Clarke. Now, I think Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell might be my favorite book of 2025. I can't stop thinking about this book. This was just excellent. So right up my alley. I was worried initially because it's over 800 pages, and I was concerned that, oh God, what if I hate it? What if I find it to be a slog? But that wasn't the case. This is such a rich story. It truly is, and I understand why people might DNF it, might want to give up on it, but this just hit the right spots for me. Susanna Clarke truly is like one of my favorite fantasy writers. The vibes of her books are just, I connect with it so much. I don't know how to properly explain it. But yeah, for those who don't know the story of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, this takes place around the time of the Napoleonic Wars. And it's about these two men, Strange and Norrell, who plan on bringing back magic to England, because England here has a very rich history of magic. And for a while, it was kind of gone. But it's about them kind of bringing it back into the forefront. This was so good. This to me is like peak historical fantasy. If your historical fantasy does not reach the heights of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, I don't know. But this one was so good. I love the way that she blended the history of England with the fantasy elements. She blended it so seamlessly. And she used it not only through the narrative, but the use of these footnotes. And honestly, you don't need to read the footnotes in this book. You do not. However, what it does is add depth and richness to the world. Like, this book, honestly, almost convinced me that magic actually existed and that England had a very rich, history of magic. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell also didn't have any of the anachronism problems that I typically have when it comes to historical fiction or historical fantasy. It did feel authentic to the time period, which I really appreciate. I also really love the way that Clarke portrays the Fae in this book. My favorite portrayals of the Fae are Susanna Clarke and Arthur Machen. I'm sorry I can't really go in depth as to why I love this book so much. I love her prose. I love this alternate world that she's crafted, but I also love the hidden one that she hints at as well, because yes, there's talk of magic and we do see things. We do see, the realm of the Fae, but you can tell that there's other mysteries to be found. And Clarke writes in a way that, you feel as if you could just go around the corner and you'll find it, but you know that you won't. There's this quote here. It's one of my favorites. It's the one that stuck out to me the most when reading this book. So it says here, this is Jonathan Strange, and he's talking with a character called Sir Walter. He looked around him and said, "And there are days when I would be away." "Where?" Sir Walter was surprised. There was no place he found so much to his liking as London, with its gaslights and its shops, its coffee houses and clubs, its 1,000 pretty women and its 1,000 varieties of gossip, and he imagined it must be the same for everyone. "Oh, wherever men of my sort used to go, long ago, wandering on paths that other men have not seen, behind the sky, on the other side of the rain." I love that. I love that. I think that line might encapsulate what I love about this book. It's simple, yet hides a lot. So yeah, I'm just gonna have to leave it at that. That's what I love about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and also The Ladies of Grace Adieu as well. This is a 5-star short story collection. If you love Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, I highly recommend that you check this one out as well. So that was my favorite books of 2025. I hope you all enjoyed. This took quite a long time. I hope I articulated my thoughts properly, and I really hope that I convinced you to check out any of these books if you already haven't. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video whenever that will be. Bye!